Hey everyone, I am Roseheart. Before we dive into today's story, it would mean the world if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. The stagecoach shuddered, its weary springs singing a discordant tune as it ground to a stop on Dustcreek's parched main thoroughfare. Clara Hastings clutched the aged seat, a hummingbird frenzy fluttering in her chest. Sunbeams, fractured and hazy through soiled panes, illuminated the worry clouding her features. She smoothed the fabric of her travel-worn dress, a once vibrant blue now faded with time and countless journeys, and adjusted her bonnet, attempting to project a poise that belied her inner turmoil. Inhaling deeply, she gathered her meager collection, a scuffed satchel containing a handful of garments, a slim volume of dried blossoms, and the time-worn portrait of her departed Thomas, and descended into the gritty Texas soil. The air, thick and arid, carried the tang of baked clay, equine scent, and a distant whisper of burning wood. Dustcreek was more diminutive than she'd envisioned, merely a smattering of timber structures languishing under the oppressive heat. Several residents paused in their day to observe the coach's arrival, their visages etched with the trials and tribulations of frontier life. Straightening, Clara approached a woman stationed on the porch of what appeared to be the General Mercantile, her bearing a careful blend of eager anticipation and cautious restraint. "Excuse me," Clara began, her voice betraying a slight tremor despite her efforts to steady it. "I'm seeking Luke Granger." The woman, a robust figure radiating warmth and possessing kind eyes, scrutinized Clara carefully before replying. "Luke? Likely out on the spread. What brings you to him, dear?" I believe he anticipates my arrival," Clara responded, her voice gaining resolve. "My name is Clara Hastings. I'm destined to be his wife." The woman's smile wavered, replaced by a mixture of dawning realization and muted alarm. She nervously fidgeted with her apron strings, her gaze flickering anxiously around the dusty square. "Oh, heavens," she murmured, scarcely audible. "There's been a dreadful misunderstanding." Clara's hopes plummeted. The delight and expectancy that had buoyed her throughout the long, taxing journey began to dissipate, leaving a cold foreboding to settle deep within her. "A misunderstanding? What do you mean?" Luke wasn't expecting anyone, Clara," the woman confessed, her tone tinged with regret. "I sent for you." Clara regarded her, dumbfounded. "You? But why ever?" "My name is Emmeline Granger. I'm Luke's sister. It's a complicated tale, dear, but in essence, Luke's been adrift since his wife Sarah passed on 2 years gone. He's withdrawn from the world. I surmised that a fresh start, a new companion, might be what he required to emerge from his sorrow. I noticed your advertisement in the Bridal Gazette and I took a liberty." Emmeline wrung her hands again, her expression pleading for understanding. "I realize it was wrong, Clara, terribly wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. I never intended to cause pain." A torrent of conflicting sensations washed over Clara: deception, fury, bewilderment, and a profound ache of disappointment. She had liquidated her assets, endured weeks of travel, all predicated on a falsehood. The dream she'd nurtured, the yearning for a new life, shattered like glass. You responded to an advertisement," Clara repeated, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "You impersonated your brother. Do you comprehend the lengths I've gone to in order to arrive here? I've forsaken everything." Emmeline moved closer, extending a hand to touch Clara's arm, but Clara flinched away. "I know, dear, I know, and I'm sincerely remorseful. I was simply desperate. Luke is a good man, a gentleman, but he's been dwelling in the shadows for far too long. I simply desired to see him content once more." "Content?" Clara scoffed, her voice laced with acrimony. "You imagined that inveigling someone into marrying him would bring him contentment. What of my own happiness, Mrs. Granger? What of my aspirations?" Emmeline's face crumpled. "I'm at a loss for words, Clara. Truly, I was merely attempting to assist. Perhaps I was mistaken. Terribly mistaken." She gazed down at the dusty earth, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Dustcreek is a demanding environment, Clara," she continued, her voice subdued. "And you appear to have weathered your share of adversity already." Clara remained silent, her gaze sweeping over the town, taking in the dilapidated structures, the sun-scorched landscape, and the weary faces of the onlookers. It was a stark contrast to the lush meadows and vibrant metropolis she had abandoned. Yet, despite the disillusionment and the ambiguity, a nascent sense of defiance flickered within her. She had journeyed this far, overcome numerous obstacles, and she would not succumb now. "Where is he?" Clara inquired, her voice unwavering despite the tremors in her hands. "Luke? He's out on the North 40, repairing fences. Won't be back until dusk." Emmeline hesitated, her eyes full of concern. "Clara, you needn't do this. I can wire you funds for passage back east. I'll cover your lodging until the next stage departs. Please, don't feel bound to remain." Clara weighed her options. Retracing her steps seemed the logical course of action, but the notion of reverting to her former existence, to the memories and the solitude, filled her with a sense of dread. She had come to Dustcreek seeking a new chapter, an opportunity to escape the spectres of her past, even if that opportunity stemmed from a deception. Perhaps something still awaited her. "I'll stay," Clara declared, her voice surprising even herself. "But only for a week. I wish to meet Luke Granger, assess the man he is, and then I shall decide what to do." Emmeline's face brightened with relief. "Oh, Clara, bless you. You won't regret this, I promise. Come, allow me to escort you to the house. It's modest, but clean and comfortable. And I'll prepare a supper that will rival any you've had in years." Clara followed Emmeline down the street, her satchel feeling heavier than before. As she walked, she couldn't help but ponder what awaited her at the Granger ranch. She had arrived in Dustcreek seeking a spouse, a family, a place to belong. Now she was confronted with a man who did not solicit her presence, a sister, in-law who had misled her, and a town that appeared as unforgiving as the Texan sun. But beneath the disappointment and the ambiguity, a spark of intrigue flickered. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could carve out a place for herself in Dustcreek. Maybe, amid the dust and the shattered dreams, she could discover a place to call home. Clara froze, gritty soil clinging to her dress like a second skin. Emmeline's bombshell reverberated within her, a leaden weight displacing the airy visions of orange groves and fresh starts. He wasn't even told? She managed, the question edged with a pain that eclipsed even the grief of Thomas's passing. Death had been brutally forthright this, a cold fabrication. Emmeline's features crumpled, and she reached out. Clara recoiled. "Clara, please. I know it was wrong, utterly. But I was at my wit's end." The desperation was a roadmap etched onto her face, a silent plea for understanding. "At your wit's end? Enough to drag me to Dustcreek under a cloud of lies? I liquidated everything, Emmeline. My house, my keepsakes, my entire existence, answering an advertisement, dreaming of a life with a man who remains blissfully unaware." The vast, indifferent Texas landscape mirrored the ache within her. The sun, bleeding across the horizon, cast grotesque shadows, deepening the unreality of the moment. Emmeline's hand dropped as if stung. Tears swam in her eyes, blurring the already fading light. I know. And I am profoundly sorry. From the deepest part of my soul. The words tumbled out, thick with unshed tears. Luke, he's been hollowed out since Mary died. He's just absent. Mute. Refuses to see anyone, anything. The ranch is crumbling, he's drowning in sorrow. And I just wanted to mend him. I thought, if he had someone like you. Clara pivoted, Emmeline's anguish failing to lessen her own. The phrase someone like you hung in the air, a mocking echo of the hopes she had carefully cultivated on her journey. Not a partnership awaited her, but a role in a badly conceived charade. And you saw deception as the solution? She asked, her voice devoid of inflection. She could almost feel the chafing weight of her trunk, a physical manifestation of her irreversible decision. Emmeline moved closer, her voice a hushed entreaty. Please, Clara, don't go. Not yet. Just afford him a chance. Afford us a chance. I know Luke's true nature. He's a good, kind soul. He's simply adrift. He needs an anchor. She reached, her grip unexpectedly firm. Her tear-filled eyes begged for understanding. Please, stay a week. Just 7 days. Let him encounter you. Let him grasp the wonderful person you are. If, after that time, he remains unmoved, indifferent, I'll accept it. I'll facilitate your return. I'll do anything. Clara focused on Emmeline's hand, the calluses and dirt a testament to a life inextricably intertwined with the land. She saw genuine torment there, the burdens of responsibility plain to see. She grasped that Emmeline's actions, however misguided, sprang from profound love and utter despair. It was an emotion she knew well. Hadn't she acted from love when nursing Thomas, clinging to threads of hope, even when logic dictated acceptance? She withdrew her hand, the brief contact leaving a lingering warmth. 1 week, she conceded, her voice barely cutting through the burgeoning chorus of crickets. That's it. 7 days. And you pledge to me, Emmeline, complete honesty with Luke. He deserves the truth. The condition offered a sliver of control in a situation spiralling beyond her grasp. Emmeline nodded vigorously, a wave of relief washing over her. I promise. Tonight. And I will exert every effort to help him see you. Her words offered some solace, but Clara knew the true challenge loomed. Reaching a grieving, resistant man seemed an impossible feat. And, Clara continued, her tone hardening, I am not a servant. I am not here to toil in the kitchen or repair fences. My purpose is to meet Luke Granger and assess whether or not Dustcreek offers a future for me. If I remain, it will be as an equal, not as an equal. Hired help. She had to define boundaries, reclaim her agency. Emmeline's relief wavered, a flicker of worry replacing it. Of course, Clara. I understand. Luke would never. He wouldn't expect that. But Clara detected the uncertainty, the unspoken recognition of Luke's unpredictable state. Good, Clara stated with resolve. I will stay for 7 days. She turned to face the house, its weathered facade bowing under the weight of the fading light. It wasn't the manor she had envisioned, but it offered shelter, a temporary respite from her disillusionment. But be clear on this, Emmeline, she added, turning back, her gaze unwavering. After that week, I decide my fate. No pressure, no pleas, no further manipulations. My future remains my own. Emmeline nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of anticipation and dread. I understand, Clara. Thank you. Thank you for offering us a chance. She squeezed Clara's hand again, the gesture now less a desperate grasp and more a fragile offering of trust. As they approached the house, Darkness consumed the Texas plains. Clara glanced at the road she had travelled, the ribbon of dust disappearing into the distance. It represented the past she had shed, the dreams she held dear. Now, those dreams were in pieces, replaced by uncertainty and the unnerving prospect of facing a man who didn't desire her, a man held captive by loss. Yet, as she crossed the threshold of the Granger home, a spark ignited within her, a surge of defiance. A silent pledge to navigate this unexpected predicament with dignity and courage. She would grant Luke Granger a week, not for Emmeline's sake, but for her own. To prove that even after deception and heartbreak, she could carve her own path, define her destiny, in the harsh and untamed Texas landscape. The afternoon sun painted elongated shadows from the porch eaves as Emmeline broke the silence with a nervous cough. "He's inside a Luke. I told him you were coming." Her fingers twisted together, a stark white braid against the worn fabric of her skirt. Clara drew herself up straighter, the weight of her travel bag suddenly dwarfed by the unease twisting in her gut. She smoothed the front of her dress, a futile gesture seeking composure. The air tasted of parched soil, mingled with an indefinable melancholy that Clara instinctively knew was the soul of this place, perhaps of Luke himself. Emmeline pushed open the screen door, its rusty hinges screaming in protest, and vanished into the shadowed depths of the house. "Luke, Clara's here." Her normally bright voice seemed to lose its vibrancy, swallowed by the dimness. A held breath of silence followed, broken only by the frantic buzzing of a trapped fly against the glass. Then, the solid thud of footsteps on aged wood, and a man materialized from the gloom. He towered over her expectations, a lithe strength honed by sun and hardship. Hair as dark as a moonless night was swept back from a brow furrowed with lines etched by sorrow and toil. But it was his eyes that snared her attention, a profound stormy blue, the colour of a turbulent ocean. They offered no welcome, no warmth, only a deep-seated, weary pain. Luke halted several feet away, his gaze sweeping over Clara with an aloof curiosity bordering on apathy. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal roped forearms, and worn denim tucked into dusty boots. He looked every part. The rancher, yet a raw vulnerability flickered beneath the stoic mask. He offered no greeting, no gesture, not even a spark of acknowledgement. "So," he finally rasped, his voice thick with disuse. "You're Clara." Clara met his unwavering stare, refusing to be cowed by his coolness. "And you're Luke," she responded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Luke Granger, unless I've been misinformed." Silence descended again, heavier now, saturated with unspoken grievances and smouldering resentment. Emmeline fidgeted, her gaze flitting back and forth between them. "Well, I'll just leave you two to talk," she mumbled, retreating toward the door. "The chickens need tending." The instant Emmeline was gone, the atmosphere thickened, became almost palpable. Clara felt precariously perched on a cliff edge, buffeted by unseen winds. "Emmeline took it upon herself to extend an invitation," Luke stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Clara inhaled deeply, striving for composure. That much I deduced. The advertisement was certainly persuasive. A muscle ticked in Luke's jaw. "Emmeline means well." "Does she?" Clara arched a brow, skepticism colouring her tone. "Because it strikes me as blatant interference in matters that aren't her concern." "She worries about me," Luke countered, a sharp edge entering his voice. "About this place. About everything. And you believe I'm the solution to her anxieties?" Clara scoffed softly. And may Lord a miracle to magically mend your broken existence. Luke winced, as if struck. I didn't solicit this, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. I didn't solicit you. I'm well aware of that, Clara retorted, her own temper igniting. And believe me, had I not invested every last cent on that infernal train ticket, I'd be on the next one heading east. Luke's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized her. Then why remain? Clara hesitated, the truth catching like a burr in her throat. It wasn't purely the money, though that was undoubtedly a factor. Something else. A stirring of intrigue. A sense of challenge. She refused to let Emmeline's meddling define her. She wouldn't allow Luke's sorrow to intimidate her. She would honour her promise to Emmeline, stay for a week, and then chart her own course. I made an agreement with Emmeline, she declared, her voice resolute. A week. After that, I'll decide my next move. A week, Luke echoed, the word dripping with disbelief. What do you envision accomplishing in a week? Repairing the roof? Milking the cows? Falling in love with a memory? The words hung in the air, weighted with pain and bitterness. Clara's heart gave a painful squeeze. She understood he wasn't simply referring to his deceased wife. He was speaking of himself. He was a spectre, chained to the past, incapable of forward motion. I envision neither, Clara replied, her tone softening. I envision observation, assessment, deciding whether this place, whether you, are worth reclamation. Luke emitted a harsh, mirthless sound that passed for laughter. Reclamation? You imagine I'm salvageable? Everyone is salvageable, Clara maintained, her gaze unwavering. It merely hinges on their willingness. She caught a fleeting glimpse of something within his eyes, a momentary flash of the man he once embodied, the man who had known joy, laughter, and life. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar shroud of grief and indifference. Don't waste your energy, he said, turning away dismissively. There's nothing here for you. He strode toward the door, his shoulders stooped, his gait heavy. Clara watched him depart, a coil of frustration tightening within her. She knew this would be arduous. Luke was a wounded creature, striking out at anyone venturing too close. Yet she also discerned a spark buried deep within, a stubborn ember of hope refusing to be extinguished. And Clara Hastings had never been one to shy away from a contest. As Luke disappeared into the barn's moor, Clara took a cleansing breath. The air still carried the scent of sun-baked earth and desolation, but now there was another note, too, a subtle thread of resolve. The coming week promised to be fraught with difficulties, she knew. But she stood ready. She would confront the phantoms of the past, and she would ultimately decide if a future worth fighting for existed. The faint tan of wood smoke lingered on Clara's clothes as she descended the stairs the following morning. In the kitchen, Emmeline grappled with a hefty cast-iron skillet that looked ancient enough to have been an heirloom. "Morning," Clara greeted, her voice still carrying the rasp of sleep. Emmeline started, the skillet nearly slipping from her grasp. "Oh, Clara! You gave me a fright. I was just about to get breakfast going. Luke usually does, but he's been gone since before sunup." She nodded vaguely toward the window, where the nascent dawn painted the horizon with strokes of rose and gold. Clara took in the kitchen. Spacious and functional, it had clearly been neglected. A film of dust layered the surfaces, and cobwebs draped the corners like morbid tapestries. "Let me lend a hand," she offered, pushing up her sleeves. "Why don't you show me where the cleaning supplies are, and I'll get this place squared away while you tackle breakfast." Relief washed over Emmeline's face, tinged with surprise. She pointed towards a cupboard beneath the sink, her movements hesitant. "Are you sure?" I wouldn't want you to feel obliged." Clara stopped her with a soft smile. "I'm no stranger to elbow grease, Emmeline. Besides, a tidy kitchen is a happy haven." Within the hour, the kitchen underwent a transformation. Clara coaxed the counters to a shine, swept the floor clear of accumulated grime, and eradicated the majority of the cobwebs. The air, formerly thick with the cloying scent of old grease, now carried a delicate, refreshing aroma of lemon from the cleanser she'd unearthed. Emmeline, initially reluctant to relinquish control, watched in astonishment as Clara worked with a quiet competence she hadn't witnessed in years. She managed to conjure up a batch of biscuits and brew a pot of coffee, the fragrant steam mingling with the lemon to create an unexpectedly inviting atmosphere. When Luke finally entered, fatigue ate deeply into his features, and his clothes coated in grit, he halted abruptly in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "What's all this?" he growled, his voice rough-edged. Emmeline stepped forward, her hands clasped nervously before her. "Clara's just helping out. I thought you might appreciate a warm breakfast and a cleaner space." Luke's gaze flickered between the two women, his expression unreadable as stone. He finally grunted, stalking to the table and dragging out a chair with a harsh scrape. He offered no thanks to Clara, but neither did he forbid her efforts. During breakfast, Luke remained taciturn, consuming his meal with a grim efficiency. Clara, adept at navigating uncomfortable silences, engaged Emmeline in polite conversation, inquiring about the ranch and the surrounding community. She learned that Dustcreek was a small, close-knit enclave, populated primarily by ranchers and farmers. The closest town of any consequence was a 2-day ride distant, forcing them to rely on their own resources. As she chatted, Clara surreptitiously observed Luke. He was a man built of hard angles and weathered planes, his face reflecting years of unremitting labour and profound heartache. A deep well of sorrow resided in his eyes, a palpable pain radiating from him like the scorching heat of a forge. After breakfast, Clara volunteered to assist Emmeline with the laundry. The wash house, a ramshackle structure situated behind the main house, housed a hand-cranked washing machine and a clothesline strung between 2 unsteady posts. While sorting through the mounds of soiled clothing, Clara noticed the extensive patching on many of Luke's shirts. "He's had these for ages," Emmeline sighed, her voice laced with affection. "I keep telling him to get rid of them, but he refuses, says they're the most comfortable." Clara picked up one of the shirts, examining the frayed fabric and the clumsy repairs. "I can fix these," she declared. "I'm a seamstress by trade. I can have them looking shipshape again." Emmeline's eyes lit up with surprise. "You can? That would be a godsend. I've attempted to mend them myself, but I'm not very skilled at it." Clara smiled warmly. "Then let's set to work." That afternoon, Clara settled on the porch, a needle and thread in hand, meticulously repairing Luke's shirts. The sun warmed her back, and a gentle breeze stirred through the trees, carrying the delicate perfume of wildflowers. As she laboured, she noticed several residents of the vicinity riding past, their gaze fixed on her. They would nod or wave tentatively, their expressions a blend of curiosity and reserve. Clara acknowledged their greetings with a friendly smile, determined to make a favourable impression. Later that day, Martha, who owned the town's general store, paid a visit, ostensibly to deliver a package for Emmeline. But Clara saw through the pretense. Martha was there to evaluate her, to ascertain what manner of woman had arrived in Dustcreek unannounced. "Welcome to Dustcreek," Martha greeted, her eyes sharp and scrutinizing. "Word is you're giving a hand around the ranch." Clara nodded, neatly severing the excess thread with her teeth. "Just doing what I can. Mrs. Granger seemed like she could use the help." Martha's lips tightened slightly, a subtle hint of the smile. "Emmeline's a good sort. Works herself ragged, And Luke, well, he's been through it. Clara paused her sewing, meeting Martha's direct gaze. I understand. Loss alters people. Martha studied her for a silent moment, her gaze unwavering. It does. But some let it consume them entirely. She hesitated before adding, Hope you're not one of those. With that pronouncement, she turned and departed, leaving Clara to contemplate her words. The sun began its descent below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the yard. Luke returned from the fields, his face even more encrusted with grime than before. He spotted Clara on the porch, carefully mending his shirts, and stopped in his tracks. He observed her for a prolonged moment, his expression a complete mask. Then, without uttering a word, he pivoted and entered the house. That evening, as Clara helped Emmeline put supper on the table, she overheard voices drifting from outside. Peering through the window, she saw a cluster of townsfolk assembled near the barn, engaged in hushed conversation. She couldn't decipher their words, but she could sense their scrutiny, their judgment. She wondered if they were dissecting her past, her motivations for being there. She wondered if she would ever earn their acceptance. Despite this uncertainty, Clara experienced a spark of hope. She had weathered far worse trials than the assessment of the small community. She had mourned a spouse and reconstructed her life from ruins. She was capable of dealing with this. She would carve out her place in Dustcreek, one stitch, one meal, one considerate act at a time. The true challenge, she knew, lay in winning over Luke. He remained the most significant impediment, the one individual whose approval mattered most, and the one who appeared intent on maintaining a firm distance. Drawn to the barn with increasing frequency, Luke Granger's visits lacked purpose. No fences to mend, no animals needing tending, just him, a silent observer. He'd prop himself against the rough-hewn planks of the corral, a grass stem his only companion, and watch Clara. Her movements possessed a quiet grace, her touch gentle as she guided a nervous mare into its stall, her voice a silken whisper that calmed the beast's jitters. Her method stood in sharp contrast to his usual brusque commands, a difference that gnawed at his long-dormant conscience. He'd witnessed her attending to a crippled chicken, her brow creased in concentration as she rigged a makeshift support from twigs and linen scraps. He'd seen her patiently offering a bottle to the orphaned calf, its tail a happy metronome as it greedily sucked down the milk. These tasks, once perceived as mere drudgery, seemed to hold a deeper significance for Clara. He couldn't deny the livestock thrived under her watchfulness. The barn itself, once a shadowy cavern, now felt brighter, infused with vitality. One afternoon, he spotted Clara and Emmeline on the porch swing, gilded by the setting sun. He lingered near the house's corner, hidden by the deepening shadows, listening. Not intentionally eavesdropping, but curious. He hadn't heard Emmeline's laughter resonate like that in years, not since the absence of Sarah. Clara recounted a tale of an escaped piglet and a disastrous attempt at crafting apple butter, her voice laced with amusement. Emmeline's initial fragile laughter gained strength, becoming heartfelt, and Luke felt a strange constriction in his chest, a pang of something akin to anticipation. He saw Clara reach over to grasp Emmeline's hand, her gaze full of warmth and empathy. Emmeline responded in kind, her face a canvas of gratitude and perhaps guilt. He couldn't be certain, but he noted Emmeline's averted glances, the nervous gnawing at her lip, a childhood habit resurrected. A thought struck him. Emmeline had been unusually circumspect about Clara's arrival at the ranch. Evasive, even, dismissing his queries with generic assurances of needed assistance, and Clara's invaluable help. He tucked that away, another piece to the emerging puzzle that was Clara Hastings. The following day, Luke rode into town for supplies. Leaving the general store, he observed Clara assisting Mrs. Henderson, the baker's wife, with a heavy flour sack. Mrs. Henderson, a woman weathered by years and burdened by arthritis, often struggled with the simplest errands. He'd offered aid himself in the past, but without the same tenderness that Clara exuded. She hoisted the sack with unexpected strength, her muscles flexing subtly beneath her dress, and carefully positioned it in the wagon, ensuring its stability. Mrs. Henderson's face lit up, wrinkles deepening with her smile. "Thank you, dear," she croaked. "You're a true blessing." Clara returned the smile, a genuine, vibrant expression that illuminated her features. "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Henderson. Is there anything else I can do?" Luke watched as they conversed, Clara listening intently as Mrs. Henderson spoke of her ailing husband and the exorbitant price of sugar. He registered Clara's attentive silence, her comforting words, her apparent investment in Mrs. Henderson's well-being. It was a simple act of grace, yet profoundly revealing. Not performed for show, it was a part of who she was. As he journeyed back to the ranch, Luke kept replaying the scene. He'd been so entrenched in his own sorrow, so overwhelmed by his own pain, that he'd failed to acknowledge the needs surrounding him. He'd retreated into himself, a mere echo of his former self, adrift in a sea of grief and regret. And now, Clara, a woman who had every justification for bitterness and resentment, was extending a hand, offering solace and support. That evening, Luke found himself seated on the porch, shaping a piece of wood with a knife. Clara was inside, helping Emmeline with the evening dishes. He could discern their voices, a soft murmur of conversation interwoven with the clinking of plates and silverware. He hadn't occupied the porch in months. It had been Sarah's sanctuary, and the memories were too sharp. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different, lighter somehow. When Clara emerged, she didn't seem surprised by his presence. She simply smiled and settled onto the swing, maintaining a comfortable distance. Silence filled the space, not strained, but observational. Luke continued to whittle, his attention riveted to the wood in his grasp. "Emmeline mentioned you were quite skilled with woodworking before." Clara's voice trailed off, hesitant. Luke sighed, ceasing his whittling and gazing out at the field. "Before Sarah died," he finished, the words devoid of inflection. A moment of silence followed. Then, Clara spoke softly. "Grief is a crushing weight, Luke." He turned to her, surprised by her bluntness. "You wouldn't comprehend that," he said, the words edged with unintentional sharpness. Clara's eyes met his, unwavering. "You'd be surprised what I understand," she replied quietly. He didn't press her. He didn't want to know. He didn't want to delve into her past, into her suffering. He had enough of his own to carry. He resumed his whittling, the silence returning. But this time, it possessed a different quality. This time, it felt like a new beginning. Later, after Clara and Emmeline had retired for the night, Luke stood in the doorway of the spare room, the room where Clara slept. He was unsure of his purpose there. He had no intention of speaking, of acting. He merely desired to see her, to observe her one last time before the day surrendered to night. She was asleep, her face serene in the faint moonlight. Her hair fanned across the pillow, a dark aureole surrounding her head. He noticed the small scar on her forehead, barely perceptible in the dimness. He wondered about its origin. He wondered about her life before Dustcreek, before him. He remained there for what seemed like an eternity, simply watching, his mind a maelstrom of contradictory emotions. Anger, resentment, curiosity, and something more. something nameless, stirring beneath the surface, a nascent seed of something new, something hopeful. He turned and departed, gently closing the door. He knew he couldn't maintain this distance indefinitely. He knew he couldn't continue to ignore her presence. He knew he had to confront her, to confront his own feelings, to confront the reality of her presence in his world. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, he would simply observe. He would simply watch and wait. He would simply try to decipher the woman who had arrived at Dustcreek, the woman who had somehow managed to revitalize his failing ranch, the woman who had somehow managed to awaken something dormant within him, something he thought had long been extinguished. A low, resonant rumble, more felt than heard, was the first warning. Not the sound of beast, but of the very air turning malevolent. Clara, pinning a shirt to the clothesline behind the ranch house, froze, the damp fabric clutched in her hand. The earlier gentle breeze became a biting lash, flinging strands of hair across her vision. She peered towards a horizon bruised with indigo and violet, swallowing the vast Texas expanse. Emmeline emerged from the doorway, worry creasing her features. "Clara, get inside. That looks like a blue norther fixing to blow." Clara had weathered tempests before, most of them internal. But this felt different, raw. "The animals, Emmeline. Are they secure?" Emmeline twisted her hands. "Luke was to see to the north pasture fence. He's being preoccupied." Buried by grief, Clara understood, haunted by the memory of what once was. Her gaze swept across the pasture, a sprawling canvas dotted with cattle, their shapes blurring into the encroaching gloom. The wind keened, a desolate lament mirroring Luke's silent pain. "I'll check," Clara declared, her voice resolute, despite the tremor in her gut. Emmeline's eyes widened. "Are you sure? It's going to be brutal. Someone must. Tell Luke to secure the barn." Clara tucked her hair behind her ears and strode toward the stables, her movements driven by purpose. The tempest pounced with furious speed. Rain hammered down in relentless torrents, dissolving the landscape into a washed-out monochrome. Jagged lightning clawed across the heavens, briefly eliminating the roiling cloudscape. The thunder boomed, an unyielding assault that vibrated through the soil beneath her boots. Gaining the shelter of the stables, Clara swiftly saddled Bess, a dependable mare. The animal was on edge, her nostrils flared wide, but Clara calmed her with soft words and steady hands. Mounting, she guided Bess forward, fighting the onslaught of wind and rain. The north pasture was a maelstrom of panicked energy. The cattle, usually so docile, were now agitated, jostling and mooing, their cries swallowed by the storm's fury. The north fence, as Emmeline had feared, was breached in several places, ripped asunder by the tempest's might. Repairing it in this maelstrom was impossible. Her sole recourse was to drive the herd toward the south pasture, boasting stronger fortifications and greater natural protection. She kicked Bess into a gallop, riding along the perimeter of the herd, shouting and gesturing. The cattle responded sluggishly, their fear rendering them obstinate. Some peeled away from the main group, scattering across the open range. Clara gave relentless chase, cutting them off and herding them back south. The storm escalated its assault. The rain lashed at her eyes, and the wind threatened to tear her from the saddle. Soaked and chilled, her clothes clinging heavily, she persevered, fueled by a fierce resolve to safeguard the animals. Abruptly, a lightning bolt detonated against a nearby tree, showering them with splintered debris. Bess screamed, rearing violently and unseating Clara. She crashed to the muddy earth, the force stealing her breath. For a heartbeat she lay there, dazed and numb. The rain pummeled her face, and the wind shrieked in her ears. An icy cold seeped into her very core. Yet surrender was not an option. She had to rise. She had to save the cattle. With a groan, she pushed herself upright, her body throbbing. She located Bess, who stood trembling a short distance away. She soothed the mare back to her, remounting with slow deliberation. She continued to herd the cattle, her limbs heavy, her mind laser-focused on the task. Gradually, painstakingly, she nudged them towards the south pasture. Finally, after what felt like an eternity lost in the storm's jaws, she reached the gate. She swung it open, driving the cattle through, counting heads as they passed. Almost all were present and accounted for. She would search for stragglers after the storm subsided. Utterly drained, but profoundly relieved, Clara slumped in the saddle, watching the cattle huddle together, seeking warmth and solace. She had prevailed. She had secured them. Turning Bess toward the ranch house, she spied Luke standing near the barn, his figure a dark silhouette against the grey canvas of the sky. He watched her approach, his expression an unreadable mask. She rode toward him, fatigue shaking her frame. Reaching him, she dismounted, her legs unsteady. "They're safe," she managed, her voice raspy. "All but a few." Luke remained silent, simply staring. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed. At last he spoke, his voice low and thick. "You could have been killed out there." Clara shrugged. Someone had to do it. He closed the distance between them, his gaze intense. "Why? Why risk your life for my stock?" Clara met his gaze, her heart aching with a familiar sorrow. She saw the grief etched in his features, the weight he carried like a physical burden. "Because they needed help," she replied softly. "And so do you, Luke." He recoiled, as if struck. Turning away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Get inside," he said dully. "You'll catch your death of cold." He offered no helping hand, no word of comfort. But Clara required none. She had confronted the storm and emerged victorious. And in doing so, she had glimpsed something flicker in Luke's eyes, a spark of hope, a trace of something more. She walked toward the house, her chin lifted, the rain washing away the grime and the unshed tears. The storm continued its violent reign, but within her, a tiny seed of hope had taken root. It would demand time, patience, and perhaps further trials, but Clara was resolved to nurture its growth. The aftermath of the blue norther left a canvas of white across Dustcreek. The sun, a pale disk in the sky, struggled to melt the icy grip on the land. Luke stood near the corral fence, watching Clara as she checked on a calf, its coat still damp despite her efforts. He hadn't slept much. The image of her battling the wind and snow, her face etched with a fierce determination, played over and over in his mind. He had been useless, frozen by a grief that seemed determined to claim him entirely. He walked towards her, the crunch of snow under his boots the only sound. She didn't look up, her attention focused on the calf. "Clara," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She straightened, wiping her hands on her worn skirt. The week she'd given herself was nearly up. "Luke," she replied, her voice guarded. She had no idea what mood he would be in. He hesitated, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Thank you," he managed, the simple phrase laden with the weight of his past silence. "For the cattle. For everything." Clara searched his face, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "They're good animals, Luke. They deserved to be saved." He nodded, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the lingering redness on her cheeks from the windburn. He noticed the way she moved, a quiet grace in her practicality. This wasn't the fragile, city-bred woman he'd imagined. "How's the fence?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Needs work," he admitted. "But I'll get to it." Clara nodded again. She had already spent the morning mending what she could, using spare wire and sheer grit. "I can help," she offered, her voice even. He looked at her, really looked at her. The offer was genuine, without expectation. A warmth flickered within him, a tiny spark in the vast emptiness. A smile, hesitant and fleeting, touched his lips. It was the first genuine smile Clara had seen on his face, and it transformed him, erasing years of grief in an instant. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't realized how much she longed to see him smile. "All right, let's get to it then." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic clang of the hammer against the fence posts the only sound. Luke showed her how to properly twist the wire, his calloused hands brushing against hers. He didn't pull away. "You're a fast learner," he commented, his voice less gruff than usual. "I've had practice," Clara replied, remembering the endless chores on her family's farm. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the snow-covered field. Luke noticed Clara shivering, despite her heavy coat. He shrugged off his own jacket and held it out to her. "Here," he said. "Take this." Clara hesitated. "You'll be cold." "I'm used to it," he said, avoiding her gaze. She took the jacket, its warmth enveloping her. It smelled of wood smoke and leather, and faintly of him. She pulled it tighter around herself, a silent thank you. As they continued to work, Clara noticed a change in Luke's demeanour. He was still reserved, but the tension that had always been present seemed to have eased. He offered her water from his canteen, and when she stumbled on a patch of ice, he reached out to steady her. Small gestures, but significant. Later that afternoon, as they were returning to the ranch house, Emmeline came running out, her face flushed with excitement. "Luke! Clara! The mercantile got a new shipment of supplies. And there's a letter for you, Clara." Clara felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. A letter? Who would be writing to her? Emmeline thrust the letter into her hand. It was addressed in a familiar, elegant script. From her sister, back east. Clara retreated to her room, the letter trembling in her grasp. She sat on the edge of the bed and slowly opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. The letter was filled with news from home births, deaths, marriages, the mundane details of a life she had left behind. But at the end, a single sentence jumped out at her. "Mr. Abernathy is still courting, but I told him you found happiness elsewhere." Clara closed her eyes, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. Relief, sadness, and something else, something akin to hope. Mr. Abernathy had been a persistent suitor, respectable and wealthy, but devoid of the spark that she longed for. She looked around the small, sparsely furnished room. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. Dustcreek was a rough, unforgiving place, and Luke Granger was a man shrouded in grief. But there was something here, something she couldn't quite define, that drew her in. A sense of purpose, a connection to the land, and a flicker of hope in the eyes of a man who had thought himself incapable of feeling anything again. When she emerged from her room, Luke was waiting for her in the kitchen. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and deliberate. He looked up as she entered, his gaze searching her face. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. Clara took a deep breath. The week was almost up. She had to make a decision. "My sister wrote," she said, "telling me about things back home." Luke nodded, his expression unreadable. "She also mentioned Aya, a suitor," Clara continued, "who is still waiting." Luke's hands stilled on the rifle. He didn't say anything, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Clara met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. I told her I wasn't coming back." The silence that followed was deafening. Luke stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something that looked suspiciously like hope. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara walked towards him, stopping just a few feet away. She looked into his eyes, seeing the pain, the grief, but also the faint glimmer of something more. "Because," she said, her voice firm, "I think there's something worth staying for here." Luke continued to stare at her, processing her words. Slowly, a small, hesitant smile spread across his face. It wasn't the fleeting smile from earlier, but something deeper, more genuine. "Then stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay and let's see what happens." The morning sun, usually a benediction on the prairie, felt like a jeering glare. Clara cranked the pump handle, its metallic shriek, a harsh counterpoint to the hollowness, gnawing at her insides. Still nothing. No encouraging gurgle, no blessed trickle. Just the abrasive grind of iron on iron. She swiped at the grime on her forehead, smearing dust across her skin. Luke remained on the porch, a silent sentinel against the brightening sky. He'd watched her struggle for the past hour, a persistent figure wrestling with an uncooperative machine. He offered neither assistance nor comfort, simply observing from the shadows. Emmeline rushed out, her brow furrowed with concern. "Clara, what's wrong?" "Still nothing." Clara straightened, her shoulders sagging ever so slightly. "Dry as a bone, Emmeline. Not a drop to be had." Emmeline wrung her hands anxiously. "But that's absurd. The wells never failed us, not even in the direst droughts." Luke finally pushed himself upright, stepping away from the porch post. "Maybe the pump's kaput." His tone was devoid of emotion. Clara rejected the thought with a shake of her head. "Doesn't seem like it. It worked just fine yesterday. And the handle moves freely, it isn't stuck. Something's blocking the flow." She approached the well's edge, peering into the inky depths. The air hung stagnant, thick with a faint pungent odour, vaguely chemical. She wrinkled her nose in distaste. "Something's down there," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Luke joined her, his gaze following hers. He remained silent, but his eyes narrowed. Suspicion flickering across his face like a lightning strike. He knew this land, understood its rhythms and its secrets. A well running dry was one thing. A fouled one that was an entirely different, more sinister matter. "I'll fetch a rope," he stated, his voice hardening with resolve. Together, they spent an hour hauling the bucket up from the abyss. The rope groaned, protesting beneath the immense weight. When the bucket finally breached the surface, dripping and burdensome, a shared gasp escaped their lips. The water was turbid, thick with a grey, viscous substance, and floating amidst the muck, impossible to misidentify even in the dim light, were clumps of withered grass, their roots encrusted with a sparkling white powder. Recognition flashed across Clara's face. She'd encountered it back on her family's farm, in Ohio. "Saltpeter," she declared, her voice tight with controlled rage. "Someone's poisoned our water supply." The ensuing silence was stifling, oppressive. Emmeline's face went ashen, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Luke's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. Who would commit such an atrocity? Emmeline whimpered, her voice trembling with fear. Luke offered no response. He stared at the contaminated water, his eyes blazing with a controlled fury. Only one man in the county was callous enough to sink this low. "Jed Stone," Clara supplied, voicing the unspoken accusation. "Runs the Rocking S Ranch, doesn't he? The one you said was struggling after the Blue Norther?" Luke nodded grimly, his gaze unwavering. "He's been trying to strong-arm us into selling for years. Claimed our water rights were hindering his livestock operation. We refused." Emmeline's eyes widened in disbelief. "But to deliberately poison our well, that's beyond the pale. It's war, waged without rules." Luke growled, his voice low and menacing. "He aims to break us, and he'll resort to any tactic, no matter how vile." The realization crashed over them, a suffocating weight of dread. Bereft of water, the ranch was doomed. The cattle would perish, the crops would wither and die, and they would be forced to relinquish their home. Clara regarded Luke, his features etched with grim determination. She perceived the burden of his responsibilities, the torment of his grief, and the smouldering anger threatening to consume him. A surge of fierce protectiveness welled up within her. She wouldn't let him confront this alone. "We have to prove his involvement," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "We need irrefutable evidence." Luke turned towards her, surprised by the steadfastness in her eyes. "Evidence? Stone will deny everything. He's a slippery eel." "Then we track the snake to its lair," Clara countered, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "He must have procured the saltpeter somewhere." "A mercantile store. A distributor, someone must have observed him making the purchase." Luke scrutinized her for a long moment, his expression gradually softening. He discerned a strength she had not previously revealed, a resilience echoing his own. Perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't alone in this battle. "Very well," he conceded, a glimmer of hope flickering in his voice. "We'll ride into town. Investigate what leads we can unearth." He turned to Emmeline. "Remain here. Watch over the cattle and ensure they stay clear of the well." Emmeline nodded, her face drawn but resolute. "Be careful, Luke." As Luke and Clara prepared to depart, a palpable tension permeated the atmosphere. The poisoned well was far more than a mere adversity. It was a declaration of hostilities. And Clara, the unexpected arrival, the reluctant bride, discovered herself aligning with Luke, prepared to fight for a home she had not initially desired, for a future she had never envisioned. The journey to Stone Creek Ranch unfolded in silence, punctuated only by the cadence of hooves against dry earth and the squeak of saddle leather. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze glued to the horizon where Stone Creek's buildings wavered like a mirage, warped by the oppressive heat. Beside her, Luke's face was an unreadable tableau of resolve. He'd been taciturn since leaving Emmeline to watch over their spread. Clara understood. He was steeling himself for a showdown he wished to avoid, yet knew he had to face. Each stride closer ratcheted up the tension in her gut. This wasn't just about tainted water. It was about dominance, avarice, and the acrimony that festered beneath Dustcreek's deceptive tranquility. Jed Stone coveted their property, and he was prepared to fight dirty for it. Stone Creek Ranch stood in sharp contrast to the Granger homestead. While the Granger Ranch wore its age with a welcoming air, Stone Creek exuded a sense of imposing power, akin to a fortress. The main house was constructed from somber, roughly cut stone, the outbuildings aligned with a rigid, almost military precision. Even the livestock appeared larger, more menacing. As they entered the yard, dust devils danced around their mounts' hooves. Several ranch hands scrutinized them with undisguised animosity, though none moved to intervene. Jed Stone emerged from the house, a shotgun resting casually in the crook of Ash Teen. His arm. He was a brawny man. Thick-necked and broad-chested, his face a permanent landscape of displeasure. Small, dark eyes narrowed as he recognized them. Granger, he rumbled, his voice a harsh rasp. Didn't figure you for trespassers on my land. Luke swung down from his saddle, his movements measured. Clara mirrored his action, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, her hand hovering near the grip of her revolver. "We're not trespassing, Stone," Luke countered, his voice a low, steady current. "We're here to discuss the well." Stone emitted a dry, grating chuckle. "The well? What's to discuss? Your water dried up? That's your misfortune, not mine." "The water didn't just dry up," Clara retorted, her voice ringing with clarity. "It was deliberately poisoned." "With saltpeter." A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed, danced in Stone's eyes, momentarily breaching his practiced composure. His face hardened. "Poisoned? That's a hefty accusation, lady. Got any evidence to back it up?" "We're gathering it," Luke replied, advancing a step. "But we know it was you, Stone." "You're the only one who gains from our misfortune." "That's a damned lie." Stone bellowed, his face flushing crimson. He subtly elevated the shotgun, his finger edging closer to the trigger. "Get off my property, Granger, before I decide you need a lesson in manners." A wave of anger washed over Clara. She moved in front of Luke, meeting Stone's gaze head-on. "You think you can intimidate us, Stone? Think you can poison our water and brandish a weapon, and we'll simply retreat? You're mistaken. We're not backing down." Stone's gaze sharpened as he appraised Clara, a glint in his eyes. "You're that mail-order bride, aren't you? Thought you'd have run off by now. Granger's got a habit of losing women. Maybe that well water wasn't poisoned. Maybe it just tasted like tears, eh?" Luke's hand shot out, seizing Clara's arm and drawing her back protectively. His eyes burned with icy fury. "Don't you dare speak of her in that manner, Stone. And never utter my wife's name again." Stone smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "Or what, Granger? Gonna whine about it? Gonna run crying to your mother?" Luke took another stride forward, his fists clenched tight. "I'm offering you one chance, Stone. Admit your transgression, and we'll settle this honorably. Deny it, and we'll do things your way." Stone roared with laughter, a mocking, contemptuous sound. "My way? My way involves you slithering back to the hole you crawled out of. My way involves you selling me that worthless patch of dirt before you starve. My way is—" He never finished the sentence. Luke surged forward, his fist landing squarely on Stone's jaw with a sickening crack. Stone stumbled backward, the shotgun clattering to the ground. The ranch hands stiffened, their hands instinctively moving toward their own sidearms. But Luke was too quick. He seized Stone by the collar, slamming him against the house wall. "I warned you," Luke growled, his voice a low, menacing vibration. "Now you're going to pay." Clara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew Luke was a good man, but she also knew he harbored a darkness, a reservoir of grief and rage that could erupt without warning. She'd glimpsed it before, but never like this. Stone thrashed, struggling to break free, but Luke maintained his grip. "You think you're so tough, Granger?" Stone choked out, his face twisted with fury. "Think you can push me around? You've got another thing coming." Luke's grip tightened further. "You poisoned our water. You threatened our livelihood. You insulted Clara." He slammed Stone against the wall again, harder this time. Stone's head connected with the stone with a sickening thud, and he groaned. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on Luke's arm. "Luke, that's enough," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "He's not worth it." Luke paused, his eyes still blazing. He looked at Clara, and gradually the rage began to subside, replaced by a flicker of something else, something softer. He released Stone, who slumped to the ground, clutching his jaw. Luke retreated a step, inhaling deeply. He turned to Clara, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Clara nodded. "I'm fine. Are you?" He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "As fine as I can be, dealing with vermin like him." He turned back to Stone, who remained on the ground, spitting blood. "This isn't over, Stone. We're not leaving. And if anything else happens to our water, our livestock, or Clara, you'll rue the day you were born." He grasped Clara's hand, his grip firm. "Let's ride," he said. They mounted their horses and left Stone Creek Ranch, leaving Jed Stone sputtering and cursing in the settling dust. As they rode, Clara observed Luke, his face a mask of grim purpose. She realized this confrontation had altered something fundamental between them. It had revealed a darker facet of his character, but it had also revealed his fierce protectiveness, his unwavering commitment to defend what he held dear. And it showed her that perhaps, just perhaps, a future in Dustcreek was possible, a future built on resilience, fortitude, and a love forged in the crucible of adversity. The silence after Jed Stone's ranch was a palpable thing, heavier than the dust cloud the truck left behind. Luke remained mute, his jaw a rigid line, eyes glued to the ribbon of road. Clara observed him, her stomach churning with unease. The brawl, or rather, the unleashed fury Luke had displayed, had unveiled a facet of him previously unseen, a shadow lurking just beneath his stoic facade. It felt like a darkness nurtured by bereavement, by agonizing loss, and, she suspected, a bone-deep aversion to exposing his vulnerabilities. "Luke," she ventured finally, her tone gentle, probing. "Everything all right?" He didn't acknowledge her, his gaze unwavering. "Fine," he clipped, the word a brusque dismissal. Clara sighed inwardly, eliciting information from him would prove a challenge. "We need to get the well functioning," she proposed, shifting to a pragmatic matter, something tangible they could both latch onto. "The sooner we begin, the sooner everyone has potable water again." That seemed to cut through his simmering resentment. A curt nod was his only reply. "I know. I'll gather the equipment in the morning." The following day broke with a crystalline clarity, the Texas sun painting the plains in shades of gold and ochre. Clara was already up, brewing coffee and preparing a simple breakfast of biscuits and cured pork when Luke emerged. He appeared worn, the lines around his eyes etched deeper, yet a subtle flicker was present, a suggestion of gratitude, or perhaps mere acquiescence. "Morning," he mumbled, accepting the offered mug. He avoided her gaze. "Morning," Clara responded, keeping her voice even, ready to tackle the well. After a wordless repast, they made their way to the barn. The air was redolent with hay and oiled leather. Luke assembled the necessary implements. A hefty wrench, a fresh coil of pipe, sealing tape, and thick gloves. Clara, meanwhile, sifted through discarded timber, locating planks suitable for constructing a makeshift platform. "Think these will suffice?" she inquired, brandishing a particularly long piece. Luke finally met her gaze, his eyes lingering a beat longer than usual. "Yeah," he conceded, his voice less abrasive than the day before. "Those'll do the trick." The well stood a distance from the homestead, a concrete shaft arising from the arid ground like a somber obelisk. The pump was a tangle of rust and ruin, a testament to prolonged neglect. The air hung heavy with the odor of stagnant water and decay. "All right," Luke declared, his voice regaining a measure of its familiar command. "Let's see what we're facing." He descended into the well with careful, deliberate movements. Clara watched from above, a sudden wave of protectiveness washing over her. He remained so haunted, so guarded, yet beneath the surface she perceived a decent man, a sturdy individual, striving to find his way towards daylight. "It's worse than anticipated," Luke announced from below a few minutes later. "The pipe's completely shot. We'll need to replace the entire section." "Okay," Clara responded, her voice steady. "Tell me what's needed." And so, they commenced the task. Luke, ensconced in the depths, wrestling with corroded pipes, and Clara, above, hoisting tools, sawing lumber, and offering words of encouragement. The sun scorched their backs, sweat stung their eyes, and the air resonated with the metallic clang of labour. But as they toiled, a subtle shift occurred. The stifling silence of the previous day began to recede, replaced by the comfortable cadence of shared effort. "Careful with that wrench, Clara." Luke cooled up, a hint of amusement colouring his tone. "You'll wrench your arm off." Clara grinned. "I'm sturdier than I seem, Granger." She confided in him about her past life, about her deceased husband, Thomas, and their small bakery in Philadelphia. She spoke of the joy inherent in creating beauty and deliciousness, and the quiet fulfillment derived from bringing happiness to others. She didn't dwell on her heartache, yet neither did she conceal it. She simply presented it as a component of her narrative, a chapter that had moulded her. Luke, in turn, spoke of his upbringing on the ranch, of his profound connection to the land, and of Sarah, his late wife. He spoke of her with a tenderness that surprised Clara, a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. He described her laughter, her warmth, and her indomitable spirit. And he spoke, hesitantly, of the ache of losing her, the emptiness that had enveloped him in the years since her passing. Through their shared narratives, a mutual appreciation bloomed. Clara looked beyond Luke's sorrow to the man he was at his core, the man he had the potential to be, and Luke, perhaps, was able to see past Clara's initial deceit to the fortitude and resilience that resided within her. At one juncture, Clara, perched precariously on the well's edge, lost her footing and almost plunged in. Luke, without a moment's hesitation, reached out and snagged her, his grip firm and unwavering. For a fleeting instant, they were suspended, their gazes locked, their bodies intimate. Clara felt a surge of electricity jolt through her, a spark of something undeniable and unexpected. He released her as swiftly as he had secured her, retreating as if burned. "Careful," he muttered, his voice roughened. Clara nodded, her cheeks flushed. "Thanks," she whispered, averting her eyes. They resumed their work, the silence now charged with a different kind of tension. The atmosphere thrummed with unspoken emotions, with possibilities neither dared contemplate. Finally, after hours of back-breaking labour, they managed to replace the corroded pipe and reassemble the pump. Luke emerged from the well, his face smudged with grime and perspiration, but his eyes gleaming with a trace of elation. "Let's see if the thing cranks," he said, his voice raspy. He primed the pump, and then, with a protesting groan, the ancient machinery sputtered to life. A trickle of water gurgled out of the spout, followed by a steady stream and finally, a powerful torrent. Clara cheered, clapping her hands with glee. "You did it, Luke!" "We did it!" He grinned, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his weathered features. "We did," he concurred, his eyes meeting hers. For a protracted moment, they stood, aligned, observing the cascading water, the sound of its rush a symphony of optimism. The sun began its descent, painting the landscape with elongated shadows. As the sun kissed the horizon, Clara asked, "Luke, would it be all right if I stayed longer?" Luke, caught off guard by the request, which would extend Clara's stay beyond their agreed-upon week, turned to look at the well, then back at her, and a slight smile playing on his lips, he replied, "Yes, you can stay." Emmeline stirred the simmering stew, the spoon's gentle scrape against the pot, a quiet rhythm against her inner chaos. A fragrant cloud of herbs and beef, usually a bomb, offered scant comfort in her anxiety-filled bakery kitchen. She cast a worried glance toward the front, where Mattie Bell, trusted friend and town oracle, arranged a vibrant pyramid of freshly baked pies. Mattie's steady presence was always a reassurance, a still point amidst the emotional storms Clara's arrival had stirred. "Mattie," Emmeline began, her voice barely audible. "Got a minute?" Perceptive, as always, Mattie straightened, her gaze as warm and knowing as the ovens she coaxed to life each morning connecting with Emmeline's across the room. "Always, dear. What troubles your spirit?" Wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron, she ambled over. Age had slowed her gait, but not her sharp wit. Emmeline indicated a secluded corner table. They settled onto the worn chairs, a silence thick with unspoken worries hanging between them. Emmeline inhaled deeply, the scent of cinnamon and crisp apples failing to quell her racing heart. "It's Luke," she blurted, the confession rushing out. "And Clara." Mattie simply nodded, her expression a closed book. "I surmised as much. What weighs so heavily?" "I'm just so worried, Mattie. Terribly. I know poking my nose in, answering that ad. Bringing Clara here under, well, a half-truth, wasn't wise. The desperation drove me. Luke was a fading, swallowed whole by his grief. I hoped a fresh face, a new beginning, might draw him back to the world." "Your intentions bloomed from a kind heart, Emmeline," Mattie murmured, patting her hand across the small table. "But the road paved with good intentions ain't always smooth." "Exactly." Emmeline's voice rose a fraction. "Clara's amazing, Mattie. Resilient, compassionate, far more than Luke deserves. Frankly, but he's shackled to Sarah's ghost. It's in his eyes, the constant comparisons. Sarah did this, Sarah loved that. He's built a blasted monument to her, and no living woman can possibly measure up." Mattie sighed, her gaze wandering to the window, where the afternoon sun painted long shadows on the sleepy street. Luke cherished Sarah deeply, Emmeline. Theirs was a rare connection, a bond forged in the crucible of hardship and shared aspirations. Releasing a love like that isn't easily done. "But it's been 5 years, Mattie. 5 years of isolation. Of watching the ranch crumble, of refusing to acknowledge the dawn. And now Clara's here, offering a chance at joy, a future free from shadows, and he's too blind, too lost in yesterday to grasp it." Emmeline's voice cracked. "What if he remains stuck? What if he pushes Clara away, shatters her spirit? She's weathered enough storms, she doesn't deserve more pain." Emmeline pictured Sarah. Not as a rival, never that. But as an unattainable ideal, a flawless memory imprinted on Luke's soul. Sarah, with her soft smile, relentless optimism, quiet fortitude. Sarah, who shared Luke's vision of building a life from the land, raising children under the vast Texas sky. Sarah, stolen too soon, leaving a gaping hole that seemed unfillable. Luke had ennobled her, almost deified her. He spoke of her intellect, her radiant beauty, her uncanny ability to find wonder in the mundane. Emmeline knew much of it was true. Sarah possessed a remarkable spirit. But time often gilded memories, polishing them until they shone like precious metal. And Luke, consumed by sorrow, had elevated Sarah to an impossible standard, against which no other woman could compete. "He needs to see Clara, Matty, for who she truly is," Emmeline pleaded, her voice trembling slightly. Not as a mere substitute for Sarah, but as an individual with her own strengths, her own ambitions, her own vulnerabilities. Someone who could breathe life back into him, if only he'd allow it. Matty squeezed Emmeline's hand again, a knowing sadness in her eyes. "Love runs a crooked course, Emmeline, rarely a straight line. And grief can contort and corrupt even the purest soul. But what if he's beyond reach, Matty? What if the anguish has hardened him beyond the beyond? Capacity to love?" Emmeline's voice was a fragile whisper, laden with apprehension. Matty slowly rose. She moved to the window, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Luke is a man forged in fire, Emmeline. He has survived trials that would have broken lesser spirits. And beneath the layers of sorrow and agony lies a decent heart. It may require time, grace, and considerable hope. But I maintain he can love again." She turned, her gaze filled with unwavering belief. "And Clara, she's a tough one, Emmeline. She doesn't wilt at a little hard work, or a little heartache. She wouldn't have stayed if she didn't see something precious worth fighting for." "But what if she's damaged irreparably?" Emmeline repeated, her question a desperate craving for reassurance. Matty drew closer, placing her hands firmly on Emmeline's shoulders. "Life is a gamble, child. Certainty is a mirage. But the greatest treasures often lie beyond the reach of comfort. All you can do is have faith that Luke will steer true, and that Clara possesses the grit to weather whatever storms arise. And you, Emmeline, must forgive yourself for your interference. Your motives were pure, and now you must trust that fate will guide them all to their rightful destinations." Emmeline gazed into Matty's sage eyes, seeking answers, seeking solace. She knew Matty spoke the truth. She had acted on her convictions, and now she had to hope that the universe would lead them all where they needed to be. Yet the worry lingered, a constant throb in her spirit. The concern that Luke's past would forever cast a shadow over his present, that Sarah's echoes would drown out the possibility of a future with Clara, and the fear that she, in her well-meaning intrusion, had only compounded the complications. The air, seasoned with sage and the musk of freshly rained earth, settled around them. From the porch swing, whose creaks punctuated the cricket's song, Luke observed Clara. Her motions in the vegetable patch were precise, revealing none of the amateur he'd anticipated. The descending sun splashed the firmament with flamboyant oranges and violets, elongating shadows that pirouetted around her. He hadn't intended to become so absorbed, yet her quiet dedication held his gaze. As Clara straightened, sweeping a tendril of hair from her brow, she met his eyes, a hesitant smile gracing her lips. "Almost tucked in for winter," she announced, her voice distinct in the tranquil air. "Just a few more days' work." He levered himself from the swing, the aged wood grumbling under his weight. "You don't need to." "It won't do itself," she retorted, returning to her task. "Unless you're partial to a frozen harvest." Luke crunched along the gravel path toward her. "I've been distracted lately." He indicated the weedy fields with a vague sweep of his hand. "The ranch it suffered." Clara paused, her gaze unwavering. There was no accusation, only a quiet empathy that both discomforted and, strangely, soothed. "It's difficult, isn't it?" she murmured. "When you've lost someone, something dear." He swallowed, the familiar tightness in his throat a painful reminder. He hadn't uttered Sarah's name in months, the wound too sensitive, the memories too sacred. But Clara's gentle understanding, untied a knot he hadn't realized was there. She was ill," he began, his voice unused and rough. It started subtly, a cough she couldn't shake. We chased every remedy, every doctor. His voice trailed off, unable to fully convey the helplessness he'd felt as Sarah withered. Consumption was the verdict. Nothing they could do. Clara edged closer, her presence a warm, steadying anchor. How long did she suffer? Nearly a year, he rasped, the memory a barbed hook in his chest. A year of watching her fade, knowing I was powerless. His fists clenched, the old anger and grief surging to the surface. I promised her I'd care for the ranch. I promised her I'd be all right. His voice fractured, and he turned away, mortified by his display of raw emotion. He felt her hand alight softly on his forearm. "It's all right not to be all right, Luke," she whispered, "especially after such a blow." He inhaled deeply, fighting for composure. The end was serene, he forced out. She was so frail, but she smiled. Said she loved me, and that she wasn't afraid. He shut his eyes, the image of Sarah's wan smile imprinted on his mind. That's what I cling to. Clara gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "It's a beautiful memory," she said. "Treasure it." A protracted silence enveloped them, broken only by the cicada's drone and a distant coyote's lament. Finally, Luke pivoted back to her, his gaze searching. "And you?" "Clara?" he questioned. Emmeline mentioned your husband. A shadow crossed Clara's face, the light in her eyes dimming perceptibly. She glanced away, toward the horizon, her posture deflating slightly. "Thomas was a banker," she said softly. "A good man. Dependable, solid, everything I thought I desired." "What happened?" Luke prompted with gentle concern. She sighed, a sound laden with sorrow. "He was caught in a bank robbery," she stated, her tone devoid of effect. "Tried to protect the patrons. He was shot." She paused, swallowing hard. "Instantaneously." Luke flinched, visualizing the scene, the abrupt violence, the senseless waste. "I'm deeply sorry," he said, his voice laced with sincerity. Clara nodded slowly, her eyes brimming but dry. "It was unforeseen," she offered. "One second he was here, the next gone." Just like that. She snapped her fingers, the sound piercing the stillness. "Everything I knew, all my plans vanished." "How long ago?" 3 years, she replied. 3 years, and it still feels like yesterday. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a profound, persistent melancholy. "You never truly recover, do you? You simply learn to live alongside it." He understood completely. The constant ache in his soul, the void in his existence, he'd learned to bear it, to function despite it. But it never truly dissipated. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Her hand was small and toughened, a working hand. It felt surprisingly strong, yet delicate at the same time. "We both carry wounds, Clara," he stated, his voice soft and genuine. "But wounds can mend. They can fortify us." She searched his eyes, questioning, hopeful. "Do you genuinely believe that, Luke?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I want to," he responded. "I want to believe we can both discover a way to move forward." They stood, hands clasped, immersed in the fading light, 2 souls burdened by sorrow, finding comfort in their common pain, a tender connection budding in the fertile ground of their shared grief. The evening air seemed to pause, as if sensing the precarious equilibrium, the hesitant promise that was beginning to burgeon between them. Emmeline watched Luke from across the dusty yard, a frown etching itself onto her usually cheerful face. He was mending a section of the fence, his movements mechanical, devoid of the energy he used to possess. The sight of Clara tending to the newly planted vegetable garden, her hands moving with a surprising grace, only intensified Emmeline's guilt. She'd meant well, Truly, but the deception felt heavier with each passing day. "Luke!" she called out, her voice carrying on the wind. He straightened, wiped his brow with his forearm, and ambled over. "What is it, Em?" he asked, his tone weary. "The town dance is Saturday," she began, carefully choosing her words. "Everyone will be there." Luke's expression remained unchanged. "So?" he replied, turning back toward the fence. Emmeline planted herself in his path. "So, you should go. And you should ask Clara to go with you." Luke stopped, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Don't be ridiculous, Emmeline." He spat the words out. "Clara didn't come all this way for dancing. She came here with expectations." Emmeline winced. "I know that, Luke. I know what I did was wrong. But she's good for you. She's brought life back to this place. And I think she likes you." Luke scoffed. "Likes me? She barely knows me. Besides, I'm not ready for any of that." He gestured vaguely, as if dismissing the entire concept of connection. "Maybe you're not," Emmeline conceded, her voice softening. "But maybe she is. Maybe she's ready for a fresh start, for something new. And maybe, just maybe, you could be too." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. "Just think about it, Luke. It's one night, one dance. It might be nice." She left him standing there, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard. He watched Clara, the soft light illuminating her face as she gently watered the young plants. A knot tightened in his stomach, a confusing mix of longing and fear. He knew Emmeline was right, at least partially. Clara had brought life back to the ranch. Her laughter, her quiet determination, had chipped away at the icy wall he'd built around himself. But the thought of taking her to the dance, of being seen with her in public, felt daunting. It felt like a betrayal of Sarah, a step into a future he wasn't sure he deserved. The next morning, Luke found himself unusually restless. He avoided Clara, busying himself with tasks that didn't require him to be near her. He felt Emmeline's eyes on him all day, a silent, knowing pressure. By late afternoon, he could bear it no longer. He strode towards the garden, his boots kicking up dust. Clara was kneeling, examining a tomato plant, her brow furrowed in concentration. He cleared his throat. She looked up, her expression open and welcoming. "Luke," she said, a hint of the smile playing on her lips. "Is everything all right?" He shuffled his feet, his gaze darting away from hers. "Emiline said something about the town dance," he mumbled, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Clara's smile faded slightly, a shadow of disappointment crossing her face. "Yes, I heard. It's this Saturday, isn't it?" He swallowed hard. "I was wondering if you'd like to go. With me." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He braced himself for rejection, for the confirmation that he was a fool to even ask. Clara's eyes widened, a spark of surprise igniting within them. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He could see the conflict warring within her, the hesitation born of her own past hurts. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, Luke, I'd like that very much." Relief washed over him, so intense it almost buckled his knees. He managed a weak smile. "Good," he said, feeling utterly inadequate. "Good. I'll pick you up then." He turned to leave, desperate to escape the intensity of the moment, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Luke," she said. He turned back, his heart pounding. "Thank you," she added, her eyes shining with a warmth that reached all the way to his soul. He nodded, unable to speak, and hurried away, leaving her in the garden, the scent of earth and tomatoes filling the air. That evening, as Clara prepared supper, Emmeline bustled into the kitchen, a mischievous grin on her face. "So," she said, leaning against the counter. "Did he ask you?" Clara blushed, turning away to stir the stew. "Yes, he did," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emmeline clapped her hands together. "I knew it. I knew he just needed a little push." Clara smiled, shaking her head. "You're incorrigible, Emmeline." Emmeline chuckled. "Maybe. But I also know my brother, and I know he needs you." Clara's smile faltered slightly. "I don't know about that," she said, her voice tinged with doubt. "He's still grieving, Emmeline. I can see it in his eyes. I don't want to replace anyone." Emmeline's expression softened. "You wouldn't be replacing anyone, Clara. You'd be adding to his life. Sarah would want him to be happy. I know she would." Clara sighed, turning back to the stew. "I just don't want to get hurt again," she confessed, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't want to open my heart only to have it broken." Emmeline crossed the room and placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. "I can't promise you won't get hurt, Clara," she said, her voice gentle. "Life is full of risks. But I can promise you that Luke is a good man. He's kind, and he's strong, and he's loyal. And I think he's starting to care about you." Clara looked at Emmeline, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Emmeline squeezed her shoulder. "I know so," she replied, her voice firm and unwavering. "Now, let's get this supper on the table. We have a dance to prepare for." As they worked side by side, a sense of anticipation filled the kitchen, a fragile bubble of hope rising above the shadows of the past. Clara glanced out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. For the first time since arriving in Dustcreek, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she might find happiness, and perhaps even love, in this unexpected place. The dance hall pulsed, a vibrant counterpoint to the quietude Luke preferred. Gas lamps cast an amber shimmer on the whirling figures, their joyous cries bouncing off the roughly hewn timbers of the building. The atmosphere, thick with the blend of exertion, sawdust and dime store cologne, felt heavy to Clara, so different from the crisp, salty air she missed from the coast. Surprisingly, she found comfort in the haven of Luke's arm as they awaited the next tune. He had maintained a courteous distance since escorting her inside, every inch a gentleman. Yet she caught the lingering quality of his gaze, the subtle softening around his lips when she spoke. This nascent connection felt delicate, vulnerable to a thoughtless remark or unrealistic expectation. A waltz began, the melancholy strains of a fiddle threading through the melody. Luke offered his hand. "Shall we?" Clara accepted, the rough texture of his palm sending a pleasant tingle up her arm. He guided her onto the floor, his movements unexpectedly fluid for a man who seemed more at ease in the saddle. As they moved together, the gap between them lessened, the music's rhythm pulling them closer. "You dance well," she commented, more to fill the silence than offer praise. "Learned from Sarah," he murmured, the words nearly lost to the music's swell. A shadow flickered across his features, unmistakable in its grief. Clara faltered slightly, and Luke's grip on her hand tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," he said, regaining his composure. "It's still new, that's all." They danced in silence for a time, punctuated only by the scrape of boots on the worn planks and the music's ebb and flow. Clara found herself studying his face, hoping to discern the man beneath the sorrow. She saw fortitude etched in the lines around his eyes and the firmness of his jaw. But she also glimpsed a profound vulnerability, a pain that seemed ingrained in his very bones. The music faded, and Luke steered her off the floor to a quieter section of the room. He leaned against a sturdy beam, watching the swirling dancers with detached eyes. Clara stood beside him, unsure of what to say. "Thank you for bringing me," she finally offered. He turned, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. "Thank you for coming. I haven't been to a dance in ages. Emmeline said you used to enjoy them immensely." He chuckled, a hollow, mirthless sound. "Emmeline prefers to remember things as she wishes they were." He paused, turning to her, his expression earnest. "Why stay, Clara? You could have left. Likely should have." Clara met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't run any more, Luke. Not from anything. Besides," she added with a wry grin, "someone needed to show you how to properly mend a fence." A genuine laugh escaped him this time, and the sound warmed her from within. "Perhaps. Still, Clara, you barely knew me. You owed me nothing. What kept you here?" Clara hesitated, searching for the right words. "I saw something in you, Luke. Something worth salvaging. And I saw potential in this ranch. In this town." She paused, inhaling deeply. "Maybe a little of myself, too. A chance for renewal, to raise something new from the embers of what had burned away." He regarded her intently, his eyes searching her own. "We're both haunted, aren't we?" "Indeed," Clara agreed softly. "But perhaps we can find a way to coexist with our ghosts." He reached for her hand, his touch both gentle and firm. "Perhaps," he breathed, his voice a mere thread of sound. The moment suspended between them, heavy with unspoken emotion and fragile anticipation. Then, a shout cut through the din, shattering the fragile spell. "Luke! Luke Granger! Is that you?" A man broke away from the crowd and made his way toward them, his face beaming. He was tall and powerfully built, with a sun-kissed complexion and an affable manner. Luke stiffened, his hand releasing hers as if burned by a flame. "Tom," he acknowledged, his tone devoid of warmth. "Good to see you, old friend," Tom said, slapping Luke heartily on the back. "Haven't seen you out and about since, well, you know." He noticed Clara, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Clara Hastings," Luke said, his voice still emotionless. "Clara, this is Tom Miller, a long-time friend." "A pleasure, ma'am," Tom said, doffing his hat. "New to Dustcreek?" "Yes," Clara replied, offering a polite smile. "Just arrived recently." Tom turned back to Luke, his face now grave. "I need a word, Luke. It's about Sarah." Luke's colour drained. "What about Sarah?" Tom hesitated, glancing at Clara again. "Maybe we should speak in private?" "No," Luke snapped. "If it involves Sarah, Clara will hear it as well." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "All right," he said, taking a breath. "I saw her, Luke. A few weeks before the accident. She wasn't alone." He let the words hang, laden with meaning. She was with another man. Clara gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her mouth. Luke stood rigid, his face a stony mask of disbelief. "What are you saying, Tom?" he whispered. "And saying," Tom replied, his voice hushed and somber, "that Sarah was having an affair." The dance hall seemed to blur, the music and laughter replaced by a suffocating silence. Clara looked at Luke. his eyes reflecting a torment that dwarfed even the grief she'd had witnessed before. The tender shoot of hope that had begun to grow between them seemed to crumple and die, weighed down by the crushing weight of a revealed secret. The fiddle's jig was a taunt, each lively note a twist of the knife. Clara, across the crowded room, danced with Billy, her joyous laughter a stark contrast to the churning in Luke's stomach. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a sour, sickening realization, fueled by Tom's earlier words. Sarah wasn't exactly lonely. He needed air, a reprieve from the suffocating weight of those insinuations, and the phantom judgment he felt boring into him. Stepping onto the back porch, the night's chill offered little comfort against the blaze in his heart. He found Tom propped against the barn, nursing a drink. "We need to talk," Luke stated, his voice a monotone mask concealing the inner tempest. Tom Carr straightened, concern wrinkling his brow. "Luke, I didn't mean to, just the unvarnished truth, Tom. Everything." Usually, the expansive Texan sky brought solace, but tonight it felt like an uncaring witness to his prayer. Humiliation. Tom sighed, raking a weary hand through his thinning hair. "It happened a long time ago. I thought you were better off in the dark." "Better off believing a lie?" Luke retorted, the waft of whiskey on Tom's breath triggering a wave of disgust. "Did everyone know? Was I the only idiot who thought she was an angel?" Tom's gaze fell. "Not everyone, Luke, but some. She was restless. You were always consumed with the ranch, always expanding. She craved attention." The words landed like a hammer blow. He'd poured his lifeblood into this land, ensuring Sarah's comfort, and the entire time he'd been so naive, so pathetically trusting. Who? Tom? Who was he? He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to unleash his rage on something solid. Tom hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "He's gone now, Luke. Dead and buried." "Big matters to me," Luke pressed, closing the distance between them. "Tell me." Tom finally yielded, muttering a name Luke barely recognized, some itinerant farmhand who'd spent a brief stint at a neighboring spread. An insignificant nobody. That somehow intensified the sting. Sarah, his Sarah, had sought solace in the arms of a nobody. Luke staggered back, the world tilting on its axis. He recalled the countless nights hunched over blueprints, charting future growth, Sarah's complaints of isolation, the subtle chill he'd attributed to homesickness. He had dismissed every red flag. He had believed her, trusted her implicitly. He'd placed her on a pedestal so high he'd missed the hairline fractures. He glanced back at the house, the faint melody still weaving through the air. Clara. Her open smile, the knowing glint in her eyes, the quiet strength she exuded. He'd almost allowed himself to believe, to hope for something real. But how could he ever trust again? How could he possibly open himself up to that kind of vulnerability? He pushed away from the barn, craving solitude amidst the wreckage of his shattered ideals. He headed towards the creek, its waters a hushed murmur in the darkness. Sinking onto the bank, the cool earth offered a slight anchor. He closed his eyes, and Sarah's face materialized, not the sanctified image he'd carried for so long, but a more complex, flawed reality. He remembered her off-key humming while baking, her irritation at his muddy boots, the sharp glint in her eyes during disagreements. He had noticed these things, but he had dismissed them, rationalized them. He had desperately wanted to believe in the fairy tale, the perfect existence, blinding himself to the truth. He pictured the photograph on his nightstand, Sarah's smiling visage frozen for eternity. A fabrication, a carefully curated illusion. He wondered if he should burn it, obliterate the last vestige of his delusion. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. It remained a piece of his history, an integral part of who he was. He opened his eyes as the first tendrils of dawn painted the eastern sky. The world seemed altered, starker, more unforgiving. He felt exposed, vulnerable as a newborn. The grief he'd nursed for Sarah had been a burdensome weight, but it had also served as a bulwark, shielding him from the perils of new connections. Now, that shield was gone, shattered beyond repair, leaving him open to the world, and to Clara. Clara's image resurfaced, her resilience, her compassion, the way she had breathed fresh life into the ranch, and into him. Could he gamble on opening himself up to her, knowing the potential for devastation, for a repeat betrayal? Could he endure such pain again? He was uncertain. Utterly uncertain. Yet, as the sun ascended, bathing the landscape in shades of apricot and gold, he understood he couldn't remain chained to the past. He had a ranch to manage, a community to support, and a critical decision looming. He would have to confront Clara, confront the truth, and determine if he possessed the fortitude to love again, despite the deep scars of his broken dreams. The barn held its breath, the only sounds the soft cadence of equine jaws and the mournful coo of a distant dove. Luke remained a statue, back turned to Clara, the bombshell of Sarah's betrayal a palpable presence between them, a suffocating miasma. He felt flayed, Tom's revelation having ripped away his carefully constructed facade of strength, leaving behind a vulnerable, foolish core. Clara faltered, uncertain how to breach the chasm of his pain, a tangible force field around him. Each step she took sent hushed shuffles through the hay scattered across the floor. "Luke," she breathed, her voice a fragile thing. Unmoving, his shoulders a study in rigid tension. "Please," he choked out, the word thick with unshed tears. "Justy, don't." Defying him, she reached, her fingers hovering before alighting on his forearm. Beneath the fabric, muscles pulsed with coiled stress. "Luke, look at me." He resisted, then pivoted slowly, his gaze bloodshot and mirroring her own ache. He seemed adrift, a vessel without a compass in a maelstrom. He began, the words failing him. I had no idea." "I know," Clara soothed, her grip firming. "It's all right. All right." A mirthless bark escaped him. "Nothing is all right, Clara. My entire life was built on a foundation of lies. I thought I knew her, that we shared something authentic, but it was all a fabrication." "This doesn't alter the essence of who you are, Luke," Clara affirmed, her gaze locked on his. "It doesn't diminish the man I see before me." He scrutinized her face, his eyes searching, skeptical. "And who is that, Clara? Who exactly do you claim to see?" "A man capable of deep affection, profound grief, and remarkable resilience," she countered, her voice imbued with conviction. "A man wrestling with torment, yes, but also possessing the power to heal. A man worth knowing, scars and all." He simply stared, his features a blank canvas. The silence stretched, weighted by unspoken feelings. At last he spoke, his voice barely audible. "Why are you here, Clara? Why stay?" "I came to help Emmeline," she began, then paused, her eyes meeting his. "And because I recognized something vital here, Luke, something worth striving for, something in you." He averted his gaze. "You don't know me." "Perhaps not entirely," Clara conceded. "But I'm learning, and what I've discovered so far resonates with me." She gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "Don't let this ruin you, Luke. Don't let it define you. He looked up, his eyes still clouded with sorrow, but with a nascent spark of hope, perhaps, igniting within their depths. It just feels like everything I held sacred was a delusion. Then forge something new, Clara urged, her tone tender yet resolute. Build something genuine, something indestructible. He was quiet, mulling over her words. Only the whisper of hay and the soft sighs of the horses broke the stillness. Finally, a fractional nod, almost invisible. I don't know how. We'll navigate it together, Clara declared, her voice ringing with unwavering faith. Together. He examined her, truly saw her, not just the comely widow who had arrived in Dustcreek, but a woman of fortitude, adaptability, and unforeseen elegance. A woman intimately familiar with pain, and still willing to offer him solace and support. He inhaled deeply, the air cleansing his lungs, dispelling some of the mental fog. Thank you, Clara, he managed, his voice raspy but heartfelt. There's no need for thanks, she replied softly. I'm here for you, Luke, in whatever capacity you require. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. I'm undeserving of you. Possibly, Clara said, mirroring his smile. But I'm here nonetheless. He enfolded her in his arms, holding her tightly, his head finding rest against her hair. The fragrance of lavender and sunshine enveloped him, a soothing balm for his wounded spirit. He clung to her, drawing strength from her presence, her unwavering commitment. They stood in the hushed barn for what felt like an eternity, two shattered souls finding refuge in each other's embrace. The weight of his grief didn't vanish completely, but its edges softened, became less oppressive. And for the first time since Sarah's death, he perceived a glimmer of possibility, a future beyond the torment. A future that might, just might, include Clara. Later, as they returned to the house, the setting sun daubing the sky with vibrant strokes of orange and violet, Luke experienced a shift within. He remained uncertain about the future, but he knew he wasn't alone. He had Clara, and her unwavering support was a lifeline in the tempest. He squeezed her hand, a tacit acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability and the burgeoning connection between them. The path ahead would be arduous, he knew, but with Clara at his side, he felt ready to confront anything. The morning sun, a gilded eye peering over the horizon, bathed Dustcreek in light, painting the arid land with strokes of ochre and gold. From the porch, Luke observed Clara, a silent guardian to her quiet dedication. She tended the vegetable garden, her fingers stained with the rich soil, her brow creased in earnest effort as she coaxed life from the resistant earth. More than just the garden thrived under her care, she was breathing life back into him, this broken-down ranch, this forgotten corner of the world. He knew it, an undeniable truth resonating within him. He approached, boots whispering against the brittle grass. The mingled fragrances of damp earth and burgeoning herbs filled his senses, a welcome balm to the sterile void that had long defined his existence. Clara, he began, his voice thick with emotion. She glanced up, her eyes, the shifting grey of a turbulent sea, meeting his gaze. A subtle smile graced her lips. Good morning, Luke, he faltered. The confession he longed to make snagged in his throat, entangled with years of sorrow and unspoken affections. He'd been a blind fool, Sarah's lies obscuring the truth that stood before him. There's something I need to say. He drew a deep breath, the air thick with the weight of his pent-up feelings. I love you, Clara. I never imagined I could feel this way again. But you've resurrected this place. Resurrected me. You've shown me the true meaning of living. Surprise widened Clara's eyes, rippling across her features like a stone dropped in still water. She slowly straightened, brushing the clinging earth from her palms. "Luke," she breathed, her voice barely audible. He closed the distance between them, his hand reaching to gently cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her jaw. "I know this is unexpected, given everything, but I need you to understand its sincerity. This is everything." Before she could respond, the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the tranquility. A bullet sliced past Luke's ear, embedding itself in the weathered wood of the fence behind them. Instinctively, they both dropped to the ground, adrenaline flooding their veins. "Down!" Luke yelled, shielding Clara with his body. He scrambled up, eyes darting across the stark landscape. Jed Stone emerged from behind a rocky outcrop, face twisted into a mask of hate, a rifle clutched in his grip. "Think you can just stroll in and take what's mine?" Jed bellowed, his voice echoing across the silent valley. "Think you can steal her from me? She was meant to be mine." A chill snaked down Luke's spine. He'd anticipated Jed's reaction to Sarah's betrayal, but not this level of violence, especially with Clara in danger. "She isn't yours, Jed," Luke countered, his voice ringing with anger and defiance. "She never was." Another shot ripped through the air, impacting the earth inches from Clara's head. Luke surged forward, tackling Jed, wrestling him for control of the weapon. Clara, fear momentarily set aside, reacted swiftly. She grabbed a discarded shovel and charged towards the struggling men. Jed, momentarily distracted by her advance, lost his grip. Luke capitalized, wrenching the rifle free and flinging it away. Rage propelling him, Jed shoved Luke aside and turned towards Clara, malice blazing in his eyes. "Think you're better than me, huh?" he spat. "Think you can just waltz in here and take everything I've ever wanted?" Clara stood firm, her gaze unwavering. She raised the shovel defensively, knuckles bone white around the handle. "You're wrong, Jed," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm. "I don't want anything that belongs to you. I'm here by choice, and I choose to stand by Luke." Jed lunged, but Clara was prepared. She swung the shovel with fierce determination, connecting solidly with Jed's shoulder. He cried out, stumbling backward, clutching his injured arm. Luke, recovering from the shove, tackled Jed again, pinning him to the ground. "It's over, Jed," Luke said, his voice hard. "Time for you to leave, and don't come back." He held Jed captive until the fury dissipated from his eyes, leaving behind only a defeated, broken man. Then, he released him. Jed, cradling his shoulder, slowly stood, then vanished into the labyrinth of rocks without a word. Exhaustion and relief washed over Luke as he watched him go. He turned back to Clara, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He saw the lingering fear in her eyes, mingled with a fierce resolve, a quiet strength he had come to deeply admire. He approached, his steps tentative. "Clara," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "Are you hurt?" She nodded, her grip firm in his. "I'm all right," she whispered. "Are you?" He squeezed her hand, offering reassurance. "I am now," he said, his gaze searching hers. "I was so afraid of losing you." He understood with sudden clarity that his feelings for Clara transcended mere affection, surpassed gratitude. He loved her, truly loved her, and he could no longer envision a life without her. He sank to one knee, the gesture spontaneous, ball of the raw emotion surging through him. He had no ring, no rehearsed speech, just his heart, laid bare before her. "Clara Hastings," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I know this isn't how you imagined things, but I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Not because of a mail-order bride advertisement, but because you choose to, because you love me too. Tears streamed down Clara's face, tears of relief, of joy, of a love she thought she would never experience again. She looked at Luke, kneeling, his face etched with sincerity and hope. She saw the lingering pain, but also the fortitude, the resilience, the unwavering love he offered. "Yes, Luke Granger," she replied, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will marry you." A radiant smile illuminated Luke's face. He rose and pulled Clara into his embrace, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair. He felt her arms encircle him, her body pressed close, a silent pledge of a future filled with love and promise. The sun ascended further, casting a warm golden light upon the Dustcreek landscape. The scars of the past remained, but they were receding, replaced by the possibility of a fresh start, a love founded on trust, a future constructed on shared dreams. They stood there, entwined, two souls finding comfort and resilience in each other, prepared to confront whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The ranch, once emblematic of Luke's grief, now stood as a symbol of hope, a testament to love's transformative power and the unexpected grace that could flourish even in the most barren of landscapes.